How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak.
Hi, welcome to How I Got Here. This is PhocusWire and Mozio's weekly podcast. We're now in season 2, where we interview innovators and entrepreneurs in travel and transportation. Joining us this week is Eric Gnock Fah. So we'll give you a better introduction in a second, but he works for Klook. Klook was created by CEO Ethan Lin, Bernice Yang, and our guest, Eric Gnock Fah, in 2014 in Hong Kong. For those of you that don't know, Klook is a major online travel agency for tours, activities and attractions, as well as local transportation. It has indeed caught the eye of some of the leading investors in venture capital and currently has pocketed around $520 million in investments. The most recent fund was $225 million Series D, which was led by the SoftBank Vision Fund. Eric, thank you very much for joining us on How I Got Here this week. It's great to see.
Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Eric, as is tradition on How I Got Here, we like to pose this question to all our guests, and if you could tell us how you got here.
Sure. So as you mentioned, we started in 2013, late 2014. But the whole idea actually came together when me and my co-founder Ethan, who I knew back in my banking days, in the finance days, we went on Nepal on a trip. To me, I think two really kind of memorable experience in Nepal. One is actually not in Nepal, but pre-Nepal, is going through hours of planning to get to know the landscape there, the merchants there, contact them. Some actually didn't really speak the language, and I think that went through like really hours of planning, right? The second memorable experience is actually carrying a bag of cash from Hong Kong, because we're a group of people, 10 people, and the merchants just didn't take credit card, and we were carrying this bag of cash into Nepal, and all along we had to use that. So I think that was probably the more kind of memorable experience, because we were worried along the way, are we going to get robbed or anything like that. And I think that basically gave us the idea was that all the hotels we pre-booked, right, planned ahead of time, but it was the experiences that we had to carry cash for. And that was kind of a light bulb inside, why couldn't the experiences and in-destination services be as seamless as, booking a flight and hotel? And that where the whole thing kind of started to form. Bernie actually was the interesting thing, right? He's our co-founder, more on the tech side. I think I went for a similar experience in scouting through LinkedIn, just like a scout for experiences in Nepal at the very beginning. To really go through I think at least like hundreds and hundreds of profiles, because I'm zero in tech, but to eventually kind of found him, who luckily was based in Hong Kong, but actually was from China. So eventually we kind of came together and built our tech and dev team, starting from Hong Kong, but also then extended it to Shenzhen, which, as many of you guys know, is kind of called the Silicon Valley of China.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Eric. So before we get into the questions, I'm going to ask you something about Nepal.
Yes.
It's my favorite country in the whole world. I traveled there for a couple of months in 2001. Those activities that you were trying to book, were they kind of mass market things? I'm thinking of, like the main temple up on the hill in Kathmandu, or some of the things in Pokhara, or were they really specific things such as trekking in the Himalayas or stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say both, right? I mean, because it's the first time, so we definitely did, the most popular things, so the temples in Kathmandu and stuff, right? But at the same time, we went into Pokhara, which actually doesn't have an international flight there, and did this really memorable experience called parahawking, right? So you paraglide, but at the same time, there's a hawk that comes to you, and there's a sustainability aspect to that. So we brought both experiences on, and in fact, if you check on our platform, my face and Ethan's face is actually on the platform, on the images. So yeah, I think both. And then eventually, if we look at the business and how that evolved, I would say that the most popular has to be there, right? I mean, if we look at travel market in general, first time and second time travel is still the mass, right? The unique experiences are getting more popular, but when you look at the sheer number, right, it's still the first time and second time travel.
Yeah, I mean that's the one of the discussions that always comes up when it's related to tours and activities. There's this big push about doing, niche cooking things, but when you go to Paris, you probably still want to climb the Eiffel Tower, right? So it's about selling both sides of things, right? Okay, so going back then, you had your kind of experience in investment banking or in the finance world, I think you said. When you had these experiences about Nepal and you wanted to create something, what kind of due diligence on your own idea did you go through before creating Klook? Because dare I say, by 2014 it was a market that was getting a lot of attention. I think TripAdvisor had just bought Viator, and this is before Booking.com got into the game, and Get Your Guide was around, and all these other people. So what did you do? Like I said, what due diligence did you do around your own idea?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, we definitely had to size the industry. How big is that industry, and is a trend there? I think, from a size perspective, there were already research out there that, it's close to a $200 billion market size. I think so from the size-wise, it ticked the box, right? The next thing we looked at is, what is the pain point of this industry? Can we make a difference there? And I think the pain point that we identify is the fact that they were still majorly offline, and they didn't have technology to bring them online. I would say not even online, but mobile. If you ask me, I think part of the reason why we see over the last decade or so or more, the digitalization of the experiences industry just never took off versus, flights and hotel. Despite there are players, right? Viator has been around for quite a while already. We fundamentally believe that mobile was the game changer because people were not pre-booking, right? They book in the trip. And that's something that we also learned really just like a month or two into the launching of a platform, because we launched with a desktop site, and then 2 months later we quickly pivoted. Well, I want to say pivoted, but we channel all our resources to actually develop the app. And today, over 80% of our bookings happen on mobile, right? And over 50% happen in the destination. So I think that was kind of where we looked at it and saw that there was a true opportunity. The trend is there, and the timing was right because of mobile.
Yeah. And last one from me for a moment, but you launched in Asia Pacific, or in particular in your home region, first of all, simply by virtue of where your home region was. You didn't have any initial designs on being a global player. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that we had an eye for it, but I think we had to start small. So our kind of vision is always, aim big, but definitely have to start small, build block by blocks, and then, head to the global expansion, which is where we are today.
Okay, David.
Oh, it's just I've been very impressed at your guys' rapid rise, and I think, as kind of Kevin alluded to, we've had actually a lot of tours and activities providers on the platform this past couple months here, Head Out and Viator. And one question I like to ask is, how have you thought about bringing these guys online? So you mentioned that there was it had delayed, and obviously there's a lot of back end providers out there, the Peaks, the various guys who their entire job is to give the software to these guys. But I think you mentioned earlier that much of your industry doesn't have that, and you had to build a lot of it yourself. So how have you thought about where in the kind of ecosystem you draw the line?
Yeah, so we started off as a B2C platform, right? And I think that's going to be still at the core and the heart of the company as a DNA. But I think as we kind of further develop our business, we realized that we do need the merchants to come online. However, comparing Asia to Europe and US, the biggest difference on the supply side is human capital costs. So in US and Europe, hiring someone to just take down notes for the booking, getting the redemption and so forth is costly. Hence, our theory is merchants are willing to pay a fee to these SaaS and technology SaaS companies to help manage the business more effectively. In Asia, however, the human capital cost is lower. So hence, they are not willing to fork out additional dollar to get the SaaS technology to manage their business. What they really care about is, how many more bookings can I get? So that's why SaaS never really worked in Asia. And that's not just towards an activity, but in primarily almost all industries that I know of. Now, SaaS will work if it's free. So that's where we had to come in and say, okay, we need to build something for a merchant, but we will have to offer for free. Now, I have to admit, our merchant solutions is not as extensive as the pros one in Europe and US, but it gets the job done. And it gets just our suppliers online, on mobile, power instant availability, real-time availability, and instant confirmation. So that's where we had to finally get involved. And I think that also it really gave us an edge in Asia, whereby it kind of formed a barrier to entry, because kind of players won't be able to easily come in to just get the same supply as ours, or I would say it would take them much longer of time to be able to get such supply and such seamless experience.
So I have a follow-up question on that. I was curious. So I remember I met up with your co-founder when I was in Hong Kong a while back, and he was talking about how one of your guys, the way you guys think about yourself is as a super app, and that is a concept I think that's only recently been introduced to America, as people kind of think of Google Maps and Uber as trying to become that, but has been very commonly held in Asia. And I think that I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I feel like in many ways, the possibility that something can actually become a super app is because of the ecosystem that exists in Southeast Asia and Asia, of exactly what you just said, which is that people aren't willing to pay for many of these other products, so like these SaaS products, so they'll go with someone like you who's willing to provide it for free, and it actually allows you to kind of get your talons in a bunch of different parts of the industry. And would you like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think for us, the super app concept appeals more to the user side. So that drives on how we build the services offerings to the consumer. So from early days, I would say, we started with tours and activities. And I think in the West, this industry is more known as the tours and activities. But our vision eventually came down to becoming an all service platform, and a platform servicing all the needs of a traveler when they're in the destination, right? So that's why we kind of came in and says, we are not just tours and activities, but kind of we're taking care of from the moment that you land all the way back when you go back home, right? So what is the first touch point, for example, in Asia, is actually SIM cards and Wi-Fi. Back in the days, I think a lot of people looked at that and it's like, oh, this is just $1, $2 type of product. Why are we bothering about it, right? But it is a pain point. It's actually very, very painful if you don't have that Wi-Fi and SIM card. In the US and Europe, you have this all country telecom packages, but in Asia, it's still very much fragmented per each country. So that's where we came in and says, we want to do something here. So we innovated on that front. And then we touched on it towards activities and all the way to even transportation. So that's where we call ourselves more of a super app for people when they're on the road.
Okay, that's very interesting. I mean, as David alludes to, the super app concept has really only become part of the vernacular here in the West in the last year and a half or so. I'm interested in your response there. I mean, if you could take us back a little bit, I'm curious about the formation of the company a little bit and some of that process for the entrepreneurs that are listening in. Now, you said that Bernie was the tech guy that was part of the trio of the three of you. Now, how did you and Ethan decide how you were going to split your roles, and who was essentially going to become the CEO and who was going to take your position?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of came naturally. So first of all, I think Bernie was an easy kind of take, right? Because he was basically a tech guy. Me and Ethan, had zero knowledge on that front. So we really much rely on him to build up the tech team, which is about 500 people today. I think then on the kind of business operation side, that's where me and Ethan split. And both of us actually has been kind of doing each of our roles to some extent all along the way. Eventually, why we have to call in a CEO, I think it's more of, when investors come in and says, you eventually need, kind of these titles and roles, right? The other thing I would say is also we really complement, me and Ethan really complement each other. He is the type where he is more kind of, bigger picture, delegation, where I really like to dig into the details. So from that angle, I would say that, from a CEO perspective, to be able to really pull resources together and not get dragged into details, I think is crucial. But at the same time, someone has to really go into details and make sure that, things are set up in a much more professional way, meeting the consumer needs. And that's where I also come in. But in terms of really, is it demand, is it supply, is it like product? Like, I think both of us have touched on various aspects of that.
And you said you had 500 people just on the tech side now. So back to those early days, I mean, how did you scale up the company from a people perspective? Was most of the investment in terms of human resources on the tech side, or was it much more about supplier relationships?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at internally in the early days, there's really three main core areas that we would look at. And in fact, I would say that we're probably a little late on the fourth area, which we can talk about it later. But the three main core areas being tech, right? And then second is being supply. And that's in terms of priority already when I talk about it. And number three is actually then marketing. So we did actually put a lot more resources on the tech front to really kick it off. And that's where we build up the tech team in Shenzhen. Like being in Hong Kong, one of the most painful way to grow the business is there's just no engineers here. Luckily, we border Shenzhen, so it's very easy in terms of commuting, but also there's a very big talent pool there. So that's where we actually spend a lot of resources. And the second is actually in supply. So when we started the business, we didn't think about where was our customer. Actually, that's kind of, I think to us was this outside in approach, because we didn't come from travel. I think a lot of travel agents think about it is, where's my customer, and I'm going to go after that customer. We actually took a different approach. We looked at it as, where's the supply and where can I add value to that? So at that time, because we were all sitting in Hong Kong, we looked at Hong Kong as a supply. And then we basically did a lot of work in consolidating and digitizing that supply. And then we looked at, where is the most popular, where is the main customer group, and then gradually map that. And then we did that again to the next destination, like Singapore. And then we looked at where's the customer coming from. And then gradually it created that network effect. But till today, I would say that merchants and supply is still at the core. I think that is something to stay, right? Demand on how we acquire users. Yesterday it's probably SEM, right? Tomorrow could be, already today is Facebook, right? Tomorrow could be Alexa, right? So the channel to acquire a user changes over time, but on the merchant side, that is something to stay. And that's where we've been spending a bit more resources, especially in the early days.
So you said there were the three of the four. What is the fourth one?
Human capital. So I think on the HR front, that was something that we were really late in the game. I think that was when I remember our first kind of HR personnel that we brought on board was when we were already a 400 people team.
Wow.
So I think then that definitely had a lot of all on the managers, I would say, right? But at the same time, I fundamentally believe that the best managers are also the best HR people, right? So that's why we relied a lot on the managers to manage people, to manage that process. But however, as the team grows, there are other HR kind of expertise that we needed. And I would say that we were a bit late on that.
Okay, David?
Yeah, so it's funny. So we work with you guys, Mozio, as one of your ground transportation partners, and enjoy our partnership together. But one thing, actually, I think we noticed when we first started with you guys had been able to onboard certain providers in areas that we had trouble, onboarding in Hong Kong, and you see Klook marketing everywhere when you fly into Hong Kong, and specifically around the airport train. And I remember, I know how hard it is to close some of these deals. I've had to personally jump on the phone myself and travel there myself. And it got me thinking, like, how did you guys prioritize your supply? Because one of the other issues I think a lot of people have with the tourism and activities market is you've got your scuba divers diving trips right next to your transfers, right next to your everything. It can be kind of, at first blush, it can seem very scatterbrained as a strategy, but clearly you guys have really thought about it.
Yeah, well, I think one of the core thing that we look at is scalability, right? How much of a demand is that product or that merchant is generating? How big is that existing industry? And then we look at is how much more can we add to that industry, of course. But scalability is at the core of everything that we do. So just like you said, if you look at as a private one, kind of peer-to-peer transfer versus a rail, we would, of course, at the beginning, prioritize on rail. The next thing that we'll do for the P2P is how do we build a platform that allows these P2P drivers to come on board, right? But that is kind of, it's a very chicken and egg thing. So we would definitely go for a product that is a bit more scalable.
How did you, talking about scalability, how did you think about which regions or cities to target next? Were you thinking of it from a domestic Hong Kong and Chinese outbound market, or were you thinking about those travelers within those markets that you were targeting next?
Yeah, well, we started off definitely from an inbound angle. So how many visitors come to this city or city, less so country, which I think, we were lucky that we were in Hong Kong. And if you look at Asia, Hong Kong actually do get, really high number of travelers. Until last year, there was a lot of events that happened in Hong Kong that changes the dynamics. And then the next is definitely like Singapore, Bangkok, and those type of destination. So we did actually roll out city by city rather than work with a DMC, like a destination management company or a wholesaler, and just says, oh, let me just onboard all the products around the world. That wasn't the approach. We did it really city by city, which is where we wanted to add value to the merchant side.
And more recently, in the last few years, you've made a deliberate attempt to target Europe. And is that using the same strategy in targeting Europeans who want to travel within Europe and the activities that those cities provide?
Yeah, well, from a supply angle, the majority of the bookings that our European merchant partners receive today are coming from our Asian customer base. And I think as we evolve, the approach will slightly adjust, right? Because we already have such network effect that we've created in Asia, by building out Europe, we can actually go a bit faster because we already have the demand and the traffic to just drive it into Europe. So then we will accelerate that expansion. But at the same time, yes, we do also see that because we had European who were using our platform coming to Asia, right? And as we onboarded European destination, we actually see organically that the European travelers are also converting with us in Europe. And I think that's the beauty of travel, that network effect that it produces over time as you build both demand and supply locally, and to be able to match that.
So Eric, I want to segue and take a little bit into the fundraising discussion. So you have one very well-known backer that you might at this point be sick and tired of answering questions about, but I feel a necessity to ask. SoftBank, back to you guys, and SoftBank's strategy can aptly be summarized as we're going to pick the winners and then flood money into them and make sure, somewhat by default of how much money and more resources they have, like you are truly the winners. And that has been proven to maybe not be as wise of a strategy as people thought it was in the past. And, clearly you guys are not among the headline cases of WeWork and Uber and have shown more diligence in how you use that money. So I think that there's this common cautionary tale that entrepreneurs are sometimes told in a little bit of an eye-rolly way, which is be careful about the valuation you take and how much money you take. And we're always kind of like, like VCs are telling us that because they want to give us less money at a better valuation. But I'm curious how you've thought about how to spend the money that you got, because getting hundreds of millions of dollars wired into your bank account must potentially cause you to get, to branch out wider. How did you think about focus during a time like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think from very day one, we've been very focused on sustainable growth. I think the kind of money burning kind of situation what you've seen with some other companies, I think it's sometimes, to me, it depends on industries, right? In the much more frequently used service industry, I think it makes more sense to kind of spend more to acquire a customer, because you would bet that the frequency of the service will come back one day, and to be able to make up for that, right? However, in travel, admittedly, the frequency is not there. So hence, that's why from day one, we've been always very focused on sustainable growth, ensuring that every customer that we acquire, can soon break even, right? So that has always been on core. Now, yes, indeed, we have also raised a lot of money, and the latest investor being SoftBank. Now, why did we raise so much money? To some extent, it's less so about how much we really need to run the business. One story that I don't tell very often, but which actually drove to how we think about fundraising was actually, I think it was 2015 when we were raising Series B. At the time of when we already signed the SPA, meaning, the final agreement, the investor dropped out because they had some issues on their balance sheet and we couldn't fund the business. And over that few weeks, we almost had to close down because we waited too long to raise money. But as the business grew that fast, we just needed working capital to finance it. So luckily, the existing investors that were with us will continue to be very positive, and hence they came in and backed the company. So from that experience onwards, we've always wanted to plan ahead. And I think we were glad that actually we did the round last year with SoftBank. Who knows, a black swan event like this could have happened. And that's where, this full fundraising to us is how we see it.
I think what's interesting about that investment round that you had spring of last year, so it's around this time, isn't it? May of 2019, yeah. Was at the same time as you were expanding into Europe. And at the very same time, the same investor invested in what would become your European rival. Which I thought was very interesting. I'm certainly journalists. We thought that was a fascinating story. I mean, give us your kind of sense on how that was playing out and how you were going to answer questions regarding that. Okay, well, SoftBank here is just going to bet on the one that's going to win in Europe, but we'll support both, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, I would say that it was definitely a testament to the industry. The fact that SoftBank and many investors saw that there was, truly an opportunity in this industry, and the new guys, including ourselves, is making a much stronger momentum here, and we can continue to capitalize on that. And the other thing is, I would say, despite we had that expansion to Europe, and as I mentioned earlier, our expansion in Europe was mainly to serve our Asian travelers. But naturally, yeah. I do believe in the global network effect. So I will not say no to a UK customer or a German customer coming to us and further building that market as well. But I think what we also saw was a synergy with the SoftBank ecosystem, especially in the Asia side, right? A lot of the major investment like Grab, like Oyo, Didi, and even their own subsidiary, Yahoo Japan, I think had a lot of synergies with us on the Asia side. And I think that was what, to some extent, also convinced us and our board of directors to be open to such a round and to be in partnership with the SoftBank.
I think one of the things that's always been, I found very interesting about the tours and activities sector, because I've written about it for a long time and also about hotels and airlines. Hotels and airlines, it's arguably are easier for a startup, say, to gain some traction because there are standards around connectivity and inventory and availability and all those kind of things. And that just doesn't exist in the tours and activities sector unless at some point the sector does come together. Now, there are the first kind of, there were certainly before all the last madness of the last 4 or 5 months happened, there were the beginnings of that. I mean, what's Klook's position on that? Because obviously standards is great from a connectivity to suppliers thing, but often there is a negative side to that. Where do you sit on the standards debate?
I strongly believe that we have to get our hands dirty to basically set that standard. If it's easy, just like you said, it's easy to start probably a hotel booking platform, whether from the meta, because there's already a lot of connectivity. But ultimately, the question we have to ask is, what is the edge that we're building, right? Yeah. And I think when we look at the experiences industry, and that's the edge, it's the standard that we're setting with the merchants who are very non-digital savvy and is not able to keep up with all the travelers coming from all around the world, this new millennial, which is very different from group tours. So that's where we add value. So those are indeed the standards that we have to set. It is a painful task. And I think for the larger OTAs, when they looked at this industry, they were like, it's just getting the hands too dirty. But someone has to do it. And if someone is able to do that, that's ultimately is competitive edge.
Yeah, Dave?
Yeah, so you mentioned Outbound, and I think that's a really interesting thing to delve into next because I feel like the outbound market is one that a lot of people don't understand. So Chinese outbound travelers need all these different things when they come to other countries. And you mentioned how mostly you guys were focused on stuff within Southeast Asia and China, but Europe was mostly to satisfy those outbound customers. How have you thought about servicing that outbound market versus servicing internally within Southeast Asia and China?
Yeah, well, the consumer market is humongous. So what we eventually came down to is the millennial crowd, right? So whether it's China outbound or is it Korean outbound or Southeast Asia outbound, yes, each market has their own needs, but at least you have to be a bit more, well, at least we thought that we have to be at least a bit more focused than trying to really cater for everyone. So by narrowing ourselves to the category of millennials, we can find more similarities despite they come from different cultures. So that's how we kind of came about it. And I think that is also where we excel. And that I think drive also differently on how we approach marketing and customer acquisition. With OTAs, I think it's widely known that it's mainly rely on search advertising. In fact, for us, three-quarter of our two-thirds of our traffic is actually coming from direct channels or organic channels, or non-paid channels, if I may call that. And that's, I think, also set us apart from the other OTAs.
So, I remember one of my first business trips to China, I met with a bunch of local providers, and one of them is their entire specialty was Mandarin drivers in New York City. And the whole point was it was catering to the outbound travelers who didn't speak English when they landed. So it almost sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, your strategy is more, let's target the guys that I don't have to worry about getting them a Mandarin driver. They're millennials, they speak English. Is that basically, you kind of said, eliminate some of these problems and just focus?
Yeah, so that's exactly the right answer. So again, we look at scale, right? Now, if China in self-standalone is indeed a big enough market, whereby if going into Chinese drivers and servicing that market makes sense, we would also do that. But at the same time, we have to be realistic is where, well, if I can get as many Chinese travelers who's going outbound, then why not target the millennial crowd who can speak English, and Korean can also. But eventually, I agree with you, and I agree with the company that you met is China ultimately is a very sizable market. So it does make sense to even just be focused on a specific segment in China and grow from there as well. And that is to us a step-by-step approach.
Now, whenever we've spoken in the past, Eric, I think I've interviewed you a couple of times on the stage at Focuswire and stuff like that, and you always talk so eloquently and positively about the experience of running Klook. Apart from, let's say, the delay in appointing a HR person, what other mistakes would you admit to having made along the way?
Yeah, well, I would say, it's for us to grow from 400 to now about, 1,500 people. We definitely needed people that comes with a bit more experience in scaling business. And I would say that we were a little late in that. However, at the same time, it becomes a very, big question of a culture fit, right? You always want to retain that startup mindset, but at the same time, we have to be realistic about that. And I think we came to that reality a bit late. But the good thing is, over the last year plus, we've brought on, people that are in the right mindset. For example, being agile, being in a startup mode, in a growth mode, but at the same time has the experience to be able to scale up, build up an entirely, for example, sales team. I think that's very, very important rather than kind of still relying on manual process, for example, right? To be able to build out a process and technology to not just for the consumer but internally as well. I think that's where we've also been lagging a bit behind.
Yeah, I'm always interested in the culture word for startups, and especially those that have grown so quickly, headcount wise, over time, and especially those that have spread geographically. I mean, what are some of the things that you do to maintain the culture of the company? I mean, do you do weekly all company meetings? I mean, what do you do to kind of spread your vision across the tentacles of the business around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no perfect answer to that, and culture is a very, very big word. I would say, for us, looking back, what worked is ensuring our first 100 employees till today, majority of them are still around, and
Okay.
putting them all across the world. So obviously, the first 100 was probably mainly from Hong Kong, where we started. Singapore was the next hub that we built, and then Shenzhen even, right? But by now, actually, most of our early employees are no longer in Hong Kong. We've flown them to other places, to help start the team there and stay there. They may not continue to be leading a team there, but they still play a key role. And I think having that, I'm very appreciative, for the fact that it's been almost 5 years, and they're still around with us. And I think that to us, was able to really keep that culture. What is that culture? I think to me, it's honestly, it's very hard to answer, but I think that has really helped the team to come together, have that strong belonging still.
Okay, Dave.
So I think that's a perfect segue actually into one of our final questions here about location. So you are based in Hong Kong. You mentioned Shenzhen and Singapore, and Shenzhen is somewhere between a special economic zone, almost charter city. But Hong Kong started out as a charter city. These are economic areas that are very unique compared to a lot of the surroundings, and you seem to have chosen 3 out of 3 of the ones that people speak about in the region. So I'm curious how you think about where you choose to locate, considering everything that's going on, being sensitive here to the very delicate situation going on in Hong Kong right now. But how do you think about where to locate people as you expand to other countries and currently even?
Yeah, well, I think what drives our decision is looking at where the talent pool is, right? So admittedly, Hong Kong does not have engineers. So definitely from a tech development innovation hub, it's not Hong Kong, and that's where we decided in Shenzhen, right? Now, despite what's been happening here in Hong Kong, I still think that there are a lot of talent, more on the corporate service side, meaning, HR, legal, and so forth. Now, building out more digital marketing actually isn't really also the forte of Hong Kong, but more so of Singapore, right? So that's where we've also positioned a lot of our talent there. So we're I would say we really look at what talent do we need and where are they, and then eventually kind of build that team on the ground locally. And then specifically on demand and supply, we strongly believe on the local operation model. So we not only base our sales team on the ground, but we also base our demand team on the ground to be a lot more closer to the customer, to be able to relate to them much more.
One of the things that I found quite interesting about the Klook story, and this is something to do with online travel that goes back over 15 years. We are in a period now where many companies based in Asia have started making forays into international markets. We've had, Ctrip's acquisition of Skyscanner and, the trip.com, which has now become the name, and your ambitions in Europe. And there appears to be almost a great degree of confidence that you're able to do this. And the reason why I say that is because, what's an interesting kind of contrast there is that so many Western companies try to do the same and come to Asia 10, 15 years ago. We had Expedia with the Elong, TripAdvisor trying to do its thing, and they've all ended up either investing or partnering with companies. What is it about your either values or the way you do business that makes you confident that you can come westwards to set up businesses over here or to set up subsidiaries over here?
Yeah, well, I would say point out back to the roots of an Asian. How many Asians grew up, speaking English, watching Hollywood movies, right? To some extent, just already understanding a bit of a Western culture, right? Versus if you look at US and Europe, how many of them actually grew up, understanding Asia from whatever media. Right? So to some extent, actually I would say we have a bit of an advantage of doing this globalization truly, because to some extent, relatively, we're better positioned. I think what was lacking in Asia, one was talent, and second was capital. And I think a lot of us talent actually are returnees from the West, right? Because there was this education boom from Asia towards studying in the West, and a lot of them are now willing to come back. And second, because of a rising consumerism in Asia, capital eventually came here as well. Along with that is innovation. So admittedly, if you look at China, a lot of innovation, started happening over the last decade, and those innovations are now very much applicable to the West as well. By leveraging technology, right? Technology as a platform is scalable, and that's where we're doing it. However, I would say in the service industry, that has been still yet to be proven, and I hope that Klook will be a good example of that success, because we've seen, yes, a lot of Asian companies trying to go abroad, but it's been really much in the hardware industry, right? Or utility product, right? Samsung or even Haier or those type of name. But from a service industry wise, I think it's hard to name one that has truly conquered that, right? To be able to be relevant in the West as well, and we hope that we will be the first.
Okay, last question from us then, because we're coming up against time. I mean, we tend, because how I got here is very much about the backstory and the history of individuals and their companies, but it would be kind of remiss of us not to give some kind of context to what's been going on, as we say, over the last 4 or 5 months. I mean, as a startup, if you still do call yourself a startup or a young business, I mean, how much of a kind of a blip along the road has this last couple of months been for the business?
Yeah, well, I would say very much in line of likely where you've heard from the industry news, where it's definitely taken a big toll on the business. I think as I speak to other peers in the market, as everyone said, this is all the natural disaster plus crisis put together, as bad as that. But luckily is over the last few weeks, we're already seeing the bottoming out. Actually, we are seeing growth picking back up in places where it's starting to unlock. And I think the advantage of doing in-destination services and specifically experiences is you would do experiences when you go abroad, but you would also do experiences when you're at home, right? Rather than if you were only in flights and to some extent in a hotel, right? There's a stronger need when you go overseas. But experiences is very much relevant, whether you're in a big country like US or China, where obviously domestic tourism, all the way to a smaller place like Hong Kong or Singapore, there are still local experiences. And that's where we're seeing organically consumers still converting and coming to us for things to do.
Great. You guys done the Airbnb virtual events thing, or tried to dabble into any of that?
Yeah, well, we did launch that. We launched Klook Home, which one part of that is virtual experiences. And the latest one that was done last week actually received quite a good feedback. We saw over close to 500,000 views on a zoo in Bali. And we definitely saw a lot of Asian travelers, well, aspiring travelers to have come online, but we also saw European kind of looking into. So I think it's definitely has potential there, but ultimately I still believe that people still have that travel bug and would like to get out and experience the travel in person.
Okay. Eric Gnock Fah, that was great. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of How I Got Here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you everybody that's tuning in. This is How I Got Here. That's Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly podcast where we talk to the innovators and entrepreneurs in travel and transportation. Thanks ever so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more inside stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages. And get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.